Hello, welcome. My name is Dr. Susan Kavaler-Adler. I'm a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst, and I'll be speaking about psychological themes, often interacting with object relations theory, since I'm an object relations theorist. Today I'm going to be speaking about the feminine self in 3 classic films. What do the films Gigi, Dirty Dancing, and Pretty Woman have to do with each other, have in common? Each of these themes celebrates a blossoming of the feminine self through vulnerability and self-assertion, vulnerability within the feminine. Each female in these films risks her own emotional security in order to stay authentic to herself and to allow herself to be fully seen by a man who ultimately surrenders to her in her strength within her vulnerability. And it is about the success and survival of the feminine self in the face of all the obstacles that come about within the myths and themes, and in this case, particular film themes that we now know as classic movies. The first of the 3 movies I'm going to discuss today is the classic musical movie, Gigi. In Gigi, a young girl who possesses the authenticity and spontaneity that the older women who surround Gaston, the Parisian princely playboy, lack. These other older women lack the themes, the spontaneity, the authenticity, and the aliveness of Gigi. And Gaston likes hanging out with Gigi, who's a young girl. However, within the course of the film, she blossoms into a tantalizing woman, shocking Gaston following the introductory tune of Maurice Chevalier's "Thank Heaven for Little Girls, for little girls get bigger every day. The little eyes so helpless and appealing. One day they'll flash and send you crashing through the ceiling." So this crashing moment occurs with Gaston within the movie when Gigi is blossoms into a young woman. She's faced with her aunts trying to maneuver her into the position of a geisha girl romantic, who it would be a pampered, kept woman in a legal contract with Gaston. This is her aunt's intentions, to set her up for this. Gigi objects. She stands up and asserts her autonomy, but she yields in her desire to be with Gaston. And she starts to become the woman that her aunt is guiding her into being, who her aunt trained her to be. So her assertion of autonomy is temporarily overcome by her wishes to be with Gaston. However, when she surrenders to a wish to be with Gaston, her sincere, untarnished, loving capacity, her capacity to love, in essence, overwhelms Gaston, and he takes flight from using her as a paid mistress. Despite Gigi's inferiority in class and economics in relation to the Parisian society that Gaston inhabits as an upper aristocratic male with economic advantages, he surrenders to Gigi's vulnerable capacity to love. In his anguished, ambivalent, and ecstatic declaration of his love for her in the operatic-like aria Gigi. This aria where he declares his love for himself and goes past his terrors of commitment is followed by his rapturous marriage proposal made to Gigi's grandmother for her hand in marriage. He proclaims that he wishes for the infinite honor of having Gigi's hand in marriage. And the grandmother goes, thank God, because Gigi won't have to be put in the awkward and painful position of being a paid mistress. Rather than force Gigi to submit to him in any way, Gaston surrenders to his love for Gigi and marries her. And there is a mutual surrender between him and Gigi. Surrender triumphs over submission on both sides. The second classic movie that I'll share with you is Dirty Dancing, in which Patrick Swayze was the man that the young ingenue girl falls in love with. The young girl in the movie, whose nickname is Baby, falls in love with this male professional dancer at a Catskill resort where she goes for the summer with her family. And she's invited into a surreptitious experience through which she ends up blossoming into her feminine love for the Patrick Swayze character. She is asked to be a decoy for Patrick Swayze's female dance partner in the movie, who's a professional dancer like he is. But this woman has to get an illegal abortion on a certain date because in the 1950s, abortion was illegal. So Baby is the one who helps them in so many ways. She helps by substituting for the professional young woman dancer and playing her role. So she has to learn to dance with the Patrick Swayze character. She helps by doing the performance so the other woman can have the abortion on that date when they had the performance commitment. But she also helps by running to her father and asking for money. And she has to lie to her father and say that it's not for anything illegal. And when the abortion occurs, it turns out that there's a threat of the woman dying from a butchered abortion. So there's a whole drama around illegal abortion and the horrible lack of having abortion be illegal at that time in the 1950s, which changed later until recently. But the main character of Baby, as she goes to her father and asks for the money, and then she has to run to him again for the help. In medical emergency, he's a doctor. She has to run to him to save this other woman, which she does, so she exposes herself to her father. Meanwhile, she's fallen in love with the Patrick Swayze boyfriend character because they've spent all this time, she and he, rehearsing for this performance. And you could see their love blossoming as she blossoms and matures into her feminine self. And then when he is banished from the resort because first she confronts her father, and this is where the theme of strength and autonomy and assertiveness as strength within vulnerability of the feminine comes to play, she confronts her father and says, well, I may have lied to you, but you've been lying to me because you never told me about a whole world where the inequities of others with less income who aren't able to go to Ivy League universities is playing itself out in the real world. So she confronts her father in this way, and after this assertion, there is her boyfriend is fired, and because he asserts his autonomy with his boss, the employer at the Catskill Resort, and he's fired. But he comes back and he dances a final scene where she emerges. He invites her to, he says, nobody puts baby in the corner when she's seated with her family in the corner, and he invites her out to come and dance on the stage with him to do his final performance. And there she emerges at the height of her feminine self and blossoms as a dancer, even getting praise from her father after that, as she leaps into the air and does the lift that she wasn't able to do in the first performance with a male professional dancer. She emerges, and that's the spectacular ending, is the dance ending, and it's the triumph of the feminine self in the face of all the obstacles, where she emerges through her vulnerability in the face of self-assertion within femininity. And that's why it's become such an incredibly popular, now classic film for us all. Thank you for joining me in that episode of that movie, and I'll be going on to the third movie, A Pretty Woman. The third movie that I'd like to share with you today, which also has become a classic film related to the strength and evolution of the feminine self, is Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. And in this movie, many of you would know, this young girl ran away from home and stumbles into being a hooker. And she's picked up by the Richard Gere character, who's a young man who's extremely rich, but he's made his fortune by being a cutthroat businessman and basically undermining the companies of older men because he has a psychological revenge against his father going on. So he's cut off from his heart. And when he finds the young woman that we call Pretty Woman, first he hires her for a week to act out the role of being his girlfriend in professional social situations with professional colleagues, and those also that he's doing business with, and one man whose company he's attempting to take over. So she becomes his pretend girlfriend, and what is surprising to the both of them is they go way beyond, in their dealings with each other, they start to go way beyond the planned sexual intimacy into a rather deep emotional intimacy. And they hear about each other's stories about how they got to be where they are. And Richard Gere's character is kind of like in this Hamlet theme of having the ghost of his father haunting him in all that he's doing, where he cuts off his heart and he does cutthroat business deals. And she gets to know him and to feel with him how he's cut off from his heart now, and he starts to open up to her. And as they're together, at one point, she feels betrayed by him during that week because he let his attorney and business partner know that she was a prostitute. And she's horrified when she hears that he knows that, because she was supposed to just be the girlfriend. But, and so she gets very hurt and she threatens to leave, and she asks for her money, but then she won't take the money. He doesn't want her to leave, Richard Gere's character. He throws the money down the bed because she wants to leave, but he doesn't want her to leave. And she goes, that famous scene, she goes out to the elevator ready to leave with all her clothing and her belongings. And the elevator guy doesn't know what to do because he comes up and it's a very embarrassing situation. And the Richard Gere character comes out and he says, well, you have been working as a prostitute, but then he sees how hurt she is, and then he explains to her that the only reason he told his friend that she was a prostitute was because his friend thought that she was a spy from the corporate the president of the corporation that they were trying to dismantle and were in these business dealings with. So he explains, he apologizes, he opens up his vulnerability. He said he just didn't know how to talk about their relationship yet, but he admits that he hurt her and he was really sorry, and he's won over by her sincere authenticity and her vulnerability and her hurt feelings. And he stops, he apologizes for treating her like a prostitute, even though originally that was how the role that she was in when she came to him. So then their falling in love begins to go to a deeper level. And when she wins him over to open his heart to join in with, instead of destroying the company of the man that he was going to take the company over with, she just by her very being, by being with him in love and allowing his heart to open, he's influenced. She never tells him what to do, but he's influenced through their being together in love and intimacy. She decides to join in with the other guy and help the company rather than destroy it. And then once he opens his heart even to business dealings in a whole different way, giving up the ghost, Hamlet's ghost of his father, they come together when he's about to leave at the end of the week and go to New York. They're in California. And he wants to keep financing her and give her a co-op to live in while he's away. And she refuses to be with him on that basis. She said that as she's opened to changing from within, she wants the fairy tale. She wants full love and commitment. She's not going to agree to just being in a co-op that he pays for. And she leaves, and she tells her friend, who she'd been roommates with, who was the one who got her into the prostitution. She tells, first of all, she brings her money from the money that she gets from Richard Gere. And she says she's going back to school and she's going to start a new life again and start her life again in a whole different way, going back to school where she used to get good grades. So she's about to leave and go back to her hometown. And Richard Gere, of course, had not wanted her to leave, but he thought he had no say in the matter. And then the hotel brings him through their car service to the location of her home. And he surrenders to her and to the fairy tale, allows himself to fall in love, to a full commitment, which is implied as he climbs a ladder with his umbrella as if it's the sword in her fairy tale coming to rescue her on her balcony. And they meet in the middle and she says, I'll rescue you right back if you rescue me. So they have a mutual rescuing of each other and they both surrender to their love. And that's how the feminine in this movie, she had asserted herself, shown strength in her vulnerability, and as in the other two movies, the male that she falls in love with surrenders, and they have a mutual surrender, and the feminine self succeeds through strength and vulnerability. So this is where the feminine self emerges. And in each of the movies, you can see the themes of that. I want to mention some of my own writings on the feminine self. I have a paper and became an article in 1990 in the American Journal of Psychoanalysis on the feminine self related to Charlotte Bronte. And that also relates to the writings of Charlotte Bronte that I go into in a deep psychological analysis in one of my books, The Compulsion to Create: Women Writers and Their Demon Lovers. It was originally published by Routledge in 1993 and then later was republished in 2013 by ORI Academic Press. And the subtitle was changed from A Psychoanalytic Study of Women Artists to Women Writers and Their Demon Lovers. But the first title, The Compulsion to Create, stands. And in the book, you see a much deeper analysis of the feminine self as it emerges through the writings of Charlotte Bronte. Even though Jane Eyre is the most popular novel of Charlotte Bronte, her psychological development and her capacity to mourn and self-integrate and allow mutual love to come with a man in her own alter ego female character, all that comes about in her last novel, Villette, which I go in depth into in a whole chapter in that book after I discuss Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre was more of a plot-driven novel, and Villette is more of a character-driven novel. So you see the character of this chauvinistic man changing and transforming, and the female character opening him up and surrendering herself. So you have the mutual surrender. So the characters change, and that, particularly the male character, through the influence of the feminine. And so then you have the triumph of the vulnerability of the feminine, but through the novel, you see the mourning process that's involved. And this relates to my theories on developmental mourning, which you can see in many of my books, Mourning, Spirituality, and Psychic Change. And the first volume, my selected papers, first of 3 volumes, called Developmental Mourning, Erotic Transference, and Object Relations Psychoanalysis. There you see in each of the chapters is a republished journal article that speaks about theories of my theory of developmental mourning. And you can see the evolution in each of the cases. Each of the cases is a story of that. So you can see all themes of mourning and those who can mourn, those who can't mourn in the Compulsion to Create book with well-known women writers, and also in the Creative Mystique, From Red Shoes Frenzy to Love and Creativity. But in my clinical books, Mourning, Spirituality, and Psychic Change, the Klein-Winnicott dialectic, anatomy of regret, and then developmental mourning, erotic transference, and object relation psychoanalysis, you can see the stories of the evolution of developmental mourning opening up the capacity to mourn and how this involves self-integration. And in terms of the feminine self, you see the development of the feminine self through that. So all of these three movies that I've talked about today relate also to my writing about the feminine self. In the literature, I've contributed to the field of psychoanalysis and object relations theory, and you also see the overall view of the mourning process in a developmental way, evolving into the authenticity of the self, the feminine as well as the masculine. But today I focused on the feminine self in these three movies and how the evolution towards strength and vulnerability is the essence of the feminine self evolving. Thank you very much for joining me today.